Hey guys, Valdo here. This is my review of the current skill revamp. It's been catching a lot of traction, and a lot of people are on different sides of the fence when it comes to this type of stuff. And I guess first, before we go into this part of the trap one, which I'm very passionate about, we're gonna go back to the skill revamp one just to kind of hit on that a little bit. Um, in my honest opinion, with the skill revamp part one, a lot of people are saying like, "Hey, well, why should we revamp all these skills when they could just end up like lightning tendrils? Why don't we just pump up the numbers or the AOE and all that jazz?" And there's a million things we could say about this. But if you're gonna sit here at your computer and tell me that like Ice Nova and Shock Nova are interesting, then we've got a problem. A newer player coming to Path of Exile, who've been coming from the current generation of RPGs, ARPGs, MMOs, whatever it may be, Shock Nova and Ice Nova are not they're not interesting. And I guess the long story short for this argument in my behalf is that I don't think that a little bit of AoE is going to make Shock Nova or Ice Nova or pumping up their numbers are going to make them more interesting or more competitive than the other skills. They're not going to they're not going to immediately become the zeitgeist. And yes, this did happen with Reeve, but the point I'm trying to make is why would you play something like Frost or Ice Nova when you could play Frostbolts? Or why would you play Vortex when you could play Frostbolt? Why would you play really any of these skills when you could just play something better? Well, that really has come to it comes down to mechanics, and that's really the direction GGG is going. I'm actually in favor of that, and I mean I don't want another lightning tendrils. I feel like we really do need some, I guess, more interesting skills. And so I guess before we go into it, I want to preface I am on the side of we want more interesting skills. Mere number buffs and stuff like that won't make a big enough difference. um, but anyways, on to the new trap stuff we're talking about. And if you guys have watched any of my content, you know that I'm the choking ash guy. I'm the guy that had like a, I was pretty serious on fire trap in the closed beta. And I was kind of, I more or less, especially in the past like patch or so, I have been at least, and for all five of you who watch my stuff, for the people who have been paying attention, I play a lot of trap builds, and I've been playing a lot of trap builds since the beginning of my time here, since Warbands. But regardless, get into it. The point I'm trying to make here is, uh, all of these changes here are not, they're not thematic in reflection to what traps are. And in some places they are, some places they aren't. So let's just jump into it. So for example, Fire Trap is losing its cooldown. Um, so and as much as people don't like this about traps, I'll I've said this a million times on forums and comments, whatever. I think cooldowns on traps is a thematic representation of what traps are. Traps are not spells. They are not arcane. They don't come out of your body. Traps are mechanically limited and should be limited. And that's why I feel like it's interesting that there is a way that you can, I guess, reduce the cooldown of the trap, or for in an actual example, how quickly you can construct a trap, which is really sweet. Um, but then removing the cooldown on fire trap literally makes it a fire spell. Like, I get it. You want to have an easier time playing these types of builds, and a lot of people just want to run one trap as if it were a spell build. They want to have traps on a 0 second cooldown as if it were a spell build, and I feel like that is just a very a huge drawback on what we would classify a trap under. So the niche playstyle that traps come under is now, I feel like, as far as the design space goes, is being invaded by a more modern view on the gameplay of Path of Exile. Because back in the day, and traps were kind of on par with other spells, and that is mainly because of how powerful they were in conjunction with Ignite and Poison. But at the same time, they were skills that were based on, I guess you could say, like, yeah, I threw a couple of traps and they did massive amounts of damage. And then I had to wait for my cooldown, and then, so on and so forth. But because of some of the nerfs to the mechanics that traps were abusing, it's caused a bit of a confliction. So now we have traps still, but Fire Trap is absolute trash because it can't ignite very well. And I've played Fire Trap. I love Fire Trap. It's so fun. But the problem is that it does so poorly on bosses. And the cooldown just doesn't help. Um, but I guess moving on. I guess here, this version of Fire Trap also deals additional fire damage to burning enemies. This is like a built-in immolate, which I think is really cool. Which makes it great to repeatedly on targets that are already on burning ground from a previous Fire Trap. So what does this mean? I guess this really just, in a way, has the player throwing Fire Trap upon Fire Trap. Uh, that's it. That's kind of the play style it goes into. Like there wouldn't be, say, a reason for you to not throw a Fire Trap on a Fire Trap, or say, for example, I wouldn't throw a fire trap and then like throw another trap. But we don't know the numbers yet, so I can't quite be too keen on this. So we're also altering the burning ground for fire traps so that it's much more intense, but lasts a shorter time. Now, this actually does circle back to the trap cooldown part of it, which I really like, because in my fire trap builds, I throw a single fire trap because it's a more potent burning ground, ignite, and initial damage, and so those are three things you scale. So this is really cool. I like this change, and it kind of again, although it is a good thematic change for fire trap in particular, not for traps in general, I think it's cool. Um, and then it goes on to say, we're still in the process of adjusting its values, but we're working towards making it so that using the skill repeatedly on a higher health target will be worth the effort for both hits and burning. So this is starting to sound more like Fire Trap is going to be a bossing skill now, which is the exact opposite of what it was. Um, well, the exact opposite of what Fire Trap was after the Ignite nerfs. So yeah, because before that it was another beast. While we don't have any numbers to confirm yet, the skill's damage and area have been slightly increased. So not only is so this is really like three big buffs here, or four big buffs here. No cooldown, higher damage on burning targets, higher burning damage on burning ground, and has higher damage overall. And then well, higher damage on the initial hit is what I think they're saying, and the area has been increased. So area is a big deal, especially throwing a single fire trap, which in my honest opinion, if you're throwing cluster traps with fire trap, you're not doing it wrong, but I feel like it's not exactly what, in my opinion, would be an ideal way to use fire trap, but that's something else. So the point here is that more area, more damage, and a new mechanic that makes fire trap interesting, as well as removing its cooldown, which kind of defined it as a trap. Um, So this is cool. I'm just curious, and as you can probably tell, my opinion is vested very much in the grandeur of what traps are. What are traps? What is their identity amongst other skills? Are trap trees going to look the same? Because right now they pretty much have like two types of trap trees, which I hate. But we'll move on. So bear trap, it's another skill that we're working on at the moment. In our current plan, it applies a debuff on enemies that increase damage they take from traps and mines. The trap still does massive damage on the target, triggering it. These two effects should make it a powerful tool for taking on bosses. So you can almost piece together a bit of a build here already. You throw a bear trap and then you throw fire traps for days, and that's pretty cool. So bear trap becoming more of a utility, investing it more in, say, um, in a trap build is far more interesting than it's ever been. So there have been slight shenanigans with poison and all these other things with bear trap, whatnot. Bear Trap, after this change, will be the Val Lightning Trap of trappers. But even at the same time, I play builds like, for example, my Detonate Dead Volatile Dead Trap build. For example, when you're doing Guardians with that build, when I was doing Hydra, the rotation for that build is like you throw your Desecrate traps, then you throw a DD trap, and then throw a VD trap. And so, like, that's three traps, but you get massive damage. And so, like, that's super cool. I think throwing more than one type of trap is like, I feel like is the ultimate flavor of traps. It is the ultimate reason you play traps is because you are going to be using more than one skill. You must be cognizant of what you are doing when you throw a trap. You're not just spamming fireball on the screen. You're not just cranking up those stacks of blade vortex. You are actually considering the traps you throw. And the interesting part is, like, if we have something, some form of, I guess, rotation where it's like, okay, Val Lightning Trap, Bear Trap, Fire Trap, and for example, Bear Trap supported by what is it? Bear Trap supported by and like added cold damage, and you go elemental equilibrium, and here we're going to be stacking damage on our fire trap, the degen portion of it. It'd be really cool to be like val lightning trap, bear trap, fire trap, and then all of a sudden you've got this massive amount of ignited damage and burning damage. That's kind of sweet. Just a thought, nothing really set in stone there, but I do like where bear trap's going, and I for the most part like where fire trap is going. And then here with lightning trap, it's also losing its cooldown. Here again, I just want to say that this is not my favorite type of change to traps, but moving forward. In our test version, Lightning Trap has a higher base crit chance and gains a large critical strike chance against shocked enemies, which should give it a much stronger critical strike focus. We're making these changes while also working on a new specific support gem that synergizes well with Lightning Trap. So they are actually defining Lightning Trap as its own solo skill of the sorts. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but I mean, let's roll back a bit. Lightning Trap before the Shimmer Mon, or what is it, Shimmerman, or something like that. It's the new Elder Wand, the ones that give you damage for power charges, um, are insane, especially on Lightning Trap and Arc Mines. So what's the point? Well, um, those that weapon in particular is absolutely insane with Lightning Trap, but it still doesn't make it very good, which is kind of sad in a way. But I think the point here is Lightning Trap has not really quite been its own thing, in my opinion, for the longest time. Yes, there are builds outliers. I've played Lightning Trap. I played a build with Lightning Trap and Ball Lightning, but Ball Lightning is your single target. Lightning Trap is your clear speed, and I've seen a lot of players use Lightning Trap to kind of level up quickly, and I like that. That's really cool about Lightning Trap. But I like this because it takes Lightning Trap and not just making it a projectile-based trap. It is now a projectile-based trap that involves critical strikes and shocking, and also a support gem that could be coming out that would synergize well with Lightning Trap. So there are like these layers of customization you're going to have with traps that I appreciate. But I guess ultimately the point I'm making here is Lightning Trap going from being a rather mediocre skill to being a more interesting skill, not like a like, oh, we pumped up those numbers, those are rookie numbers, to like, hey, this is actually an interesting skill now, and there's even more support gems to choose from to make it better. So I like that. Lightning Trap is pretty cool here. And then some other vague changes they have is the new trap specific support gem will give you a chance to generate both power and frenzy charges when your traps are triggered, while simultaneously giving you a critical strike multiplier for each power charge and increased throw speed for each frenzy charge. So I guess one of the things that I want to make note of here is and this is in my guide if anybody has read that ever, is trap throwing speed is a big deal. It is literally the cast speed of traps. In my opinion, that throwing speed is such a massive boon to traps, um, that like you could almost consider it like, um, well, think about it like this: trap throwing speed is the faster casting of traps. Um, Cluster traps is like spell echo on steroids, and those two together are almost like you're throwing massive amounts of damage on the board at once. And this support gem by itself isn't just power and frenzy charge generation, because it kind of is. But the point here is that the frenzy charges that you get from this and the power charges you get from this allows build diversity amongst trap builds, and that's because Tinker Skin isn't required. That means that the node on the tree, the Blast Cascade, the Master Sapper is not required to run traps anymore. Meaning one of the biggest changes you could possibly make to traps is how they path on the tree. So let's just run this back a bit. More build diversity on the skill tree for traps. Its biggest weakness, right? Not only are they doing that, but they're adding new nodes to the tree, which we'll go into in a second. That is making a massive change to traps. So not only are traps going to be more interesting, have no cooldowns, and have like multi, I guess, more layers of interesting things associated with the skills, they're also gonna have a easier time pathing around the tree potentially. But moving on, because I feel like That is a big place of talk when we see that skill gem, because if that skill gem comes out and it says you get more, critical strike chance, or I mean multiplier, and you also get throw speed, but it ends up being kind of shit, then it's a different story. But anyways, the new trap. I'm sorry, we're developing changes to the shadow starting area and other trap clusters. The shadow will be offered passives that increase all trap damage right away, rather than having to decide early on between using elemental or physical damage. So I just want to show you something really quick. I don't actually have the picture, but I think where they are putting it is in between here. Let me. They're putting it pretty much here, right between the LE and the crit nodes. So, right between the LE and the crit nodes, I think that's kind of a big deal because that's actually a general place. Uh, if you do this, if another ascendancy goes traps, they can. That's an accessible spot. It's a spot that the Inquisitor can get to. It's a spot that the Ranger can get to. It's pretty much all these people on this side of the tree. They can make it there. And I find that pretty good. And I know that they're going to be buffing and changing a lot more of the nodes, and that's kind of a big deal. But beyond that, let's see. Okay. Um, we're planning to introduce a number of new trap skills alongside these changes, which we'll reveal more about as the development progresses. So, this is super vague. You really can't pull anything from this. More trap skills. The last one was Ice Trap. Um, that was a cool skill. I liked Ice Trap. Ice Trap is actually not interesting. It's pretty, but it's not very interesting. I hope that these new skills are more inspired like these changes to Bear Trap and Fire Trap and Lightning Trap. I find it highly unlikely that these skills will be bad. Um, Mostly because with the direction we're going, um, I have given traps more credit than they're worth. Well, I guess more credit than most people give them because they are pretty high damage, very low risk, and are just generally good. Um, Most people don't think so. Most people think traps are kind of bad. I find them to be really good. Their only real drawback is their skill tree. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that traps, these new traps, I mean, will probably be very strong because of all the new supports and all the new added stuff. And all of these general buffs like Bear Trap and whatnot are going to be kind of nuts. But moving forward, it's worth noting that we're also planning to increase the active trap limit significantly, but this is still undergoing testing to assess the risk of doing so. This makes a lot of sense because if you have no cooldowns, you'll generally want to be throwing a shit ton of them. There may be other changes to trap mechanics coming, but we're still discussing these options. It's likely that we'll reveal more about this when we announce the other upcoming trap skills and continue to keep updating on our plans. Keep an eye out. Please note that this post outlines our current plans and thoughts, which may be subject to change while we continue to work on content update 3.3.0. So I guess overall my thoughts about these changes, they're all generally very powerful, very interesting, and very cool. My only thing or my only gripe is removing the most defining feature of the trap is making it a spell. And yes, I'm a little bit salty about that. Yes, I'm a little bit bothered that like someone like myself who's been playing traps like since warbands is a little bit salty because I've played them when they were like savage, like when they were really fucking good. When you could run up and throw a fire trap and one bang ignite Hydra, like that was fun. And like now we're in this spot where they're not so great. Poison's not so good, Ignite's not so good, and like everyone thinks they're shit. And then you've got like all like and yeah, there's some things that make them clunky and they're not exactly the most enjoyable playstyle, but I like that. I think that was a defining feature. Imagine all these changes. Instead of removing the trap cooldown, they're 2 seconds instead of three. That would have been way more acceptable, in my opinion. Just for me, I know everybody else is fine with this. I know everybody else really wants this change, but I feel like this removes a massive part of the identity for Fire Trap and Bear Trap and Lightning Trap, or not really Bear Trap, but I guess one of the big things I wanted to kind of make note of is and this is kind of out of context of what I was just saying, Fire Trap is great, but if they add a skill to the game that is basically Fire Trap but better, that would kind of be annoying. But a lot of people are always always thinking to themselves like, Why would I play shit? What's a good one? Why would you play Ice Nova? Or I'm sorry, Shock Nova instead of playing say Storm Call? Right? There are two AOE skills. One is less intrusive, and one is right up in the face. And the difference really is the mechanics behind those skills. And so, like, I've got a bit of a gripe with this because I'm on both sides here. With the new skill revamps, in the past, we've had skills like Glacial Hammer, and alongside the same changes that increase Glacial Hammer's damage, they released another skill called Ice Crash. So, what am I trying to say? Well, I love Glacial Hammer. I think it's such a sick skill. I think it's really cool, really interesting actually. There's a lot of really cool support already in the game for it. But imagine a world where instead of Ice Crash merely releasing alongside Glacial Hammer, Ice Crash was uh, I don't want to say replaced, but the reworked version of Glacial Hammer. Nobody would have batted an eye. I bet there would have been like one or two people that were like, "Oh man, Glacial Hammer's gone," but most of the community would have been okay with it being replaced. So what am I trying to say here? Well, in a way, if Detonate Dead had been replaced by say Volatile Dead, everyone would have been fine. It's attempting to retain an outdated skill um rather than like by bumping up its numbers has in my opinion proved to be uninteresting, and I don't know, it seems wrong. It seems wrong that Glacial Hammer exists in a state where it's good defined by the items used with it. So like you can make any like if you're making Glacial Hammer good, all the items you would use to make it good could make any skill good, right? But it's not interesting on its own. I love it, it's cool, but Glacial Hammer isn't interesting. Ice Crash, on the other hand, actually has some interesting mechanics to it. It has a lesser attack speed multiplier that makes it feel like you're hitting harder rather than faster, which I feel like a lot of melee skills need. It has like this cascade effect where, there's like three rings and it's really flashy and looks really cool and it's crunchy, whatever. It's like everything that the Glacial Hammer always wanted to be, and that makes me resent like Ice Crash a lot actually, because a skill that I originally liked, it was like my first skill like I ever used was Glacial Hammer when I started the game, and so the point I'm trying to make is you have these skills like for example when they made Stormburst, it was like I guess like Stormburst is a very interesting skill on its own. It doesn't seem like it could really replace another skill. If they ever do something like change up Shock Nova and all that, I want them to be their own interesting skill in the same vein as Stormcall. I want them to be as interesting as Stormcall. I want these skills to be as interesting as the newer skills that are coming out. I don't want bumped up numbers on Glacial Hammer. People talk shit about that 6%, whatever it was. And just I think anybody that feels like numbers is all we need on some of these skills, you're crazy. Like there's so many reasons we need a big difference on some of these skills. Not just because it looks nice for newer players, not just because I want a personal rework for my favorite skill and I hate the identity of my current skill. No, it's because these skills aren't actually interesting. Like, how is it interesting for Ice Nova that you just literally pulse a cold pulse that does ice damage, like cold damage? That's it. That's all it does. Like, like I will pull up for you right now a chilling circle of ice expands from the caster. If the caster targets near one of their frostbolt projectiles, it will expand from the projectile instead. Before it said anything about frostbolt, before frostbolt came out, that literally that first line of text was all that it did. That's it. That's all it was. And when the game first came out, it was a great leveling skill. Hell, Val Ice Nova is far more interesting than this. If you took when Awakening came, or not Awakening, when what was it? When Aziri came out, if you had taken Ice Nova and replaced it with like a mediocre version of Val Ice Nova, do you know how much cooler Ice Nova would have been? Like instead of making a whole new skill, and I know this is a Val skill, so I know what I'm aware. I'm aware of this. Ice Nova needs to be more interesting than this line here. Doing more damage when you fire it from a Frostbolt is cool, but I guess the real issue here is like they added the interaction because it was interesting, and I appreciate that, but it's just not good enough. Let's say there was a threshold jolt for Ice Nova that said that when Ice Nova is casted from a Frostbolt, the Frostbolt stops moving. You could fire it in the pack, and then cast Ice Nova on that over and over and over again. And I mean, like, yeah, that's still a slow playstyle, and that's still kind of the problem with the skill, is you're playing a very slow playstyle. How much worse can it be than ED, right? And I mean, I guess the argument aside, I don't want to see this anymore. I don't want to see Ice Nova, and I like the idea that Shock Nova has rings and all that, but that's not cool. But for all the skills on here, or that need to be reworked, I don't know, dude. Numbers is nothing. But I guess I'm rambling now. Um, if you guys have any feedback for me, have anything to say, just let me know. Like, I'm not an alien to like feedback. I do want to see what you guys are thinking. I'm probably gonna come out with more of these. I kind of do enjoy talking about these, so um, if anybody does want to kind of give me some feedback on how I can do these better, that'd be great. Um, but yeah, thanks for watching, guys.